Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Vivek Dhar, a specialist in mining and energy commodities at the Commonwealth Bank. Vivek, thanks for your time. Just give us a sense of what's happened to copper prices in the past 12 hours or so since Trump made this statement.
Sure. So look, in terms of what's happened with copper, it's a lot to do with regional pricing. So if you look at what's happened in the US market, the COMEX market, we have seen a massive surge in prices that has put it well above what we typically quote, which is the London Metal Exchange price. And that premium has now ballooned to about 25%. And this has all come about because of a surprise announcement of a 50% tariff proposed on copper, which could be actionable by the end of this month or the 1st of August. And that has really been what's rocked the market in the last 24 hours.
The thing is, though, this isn't the first time we've heard Trump mention placing tariffs on copper. He has spoken about it earlier this year, hasn't he? So surely the market's kind of been expecting this?
Yes, look, in terms of how the market has really played copper tariffs, and you're spot on, in January was the first time we heard Trump talk about copper tariffs. And in February, he started with the executive order, the investigation into copper and its threats to national security, known as the Section 232. And in terms of how markets were placed around that, that's certainly when we started to see this premium crop in for COMEX futures relative to the LME. And already that was when the traders were already pushing a lot of copper into the US. So US copper imports in the first few months of this year have absolutely surged on the back of this expectation of copper tariffs. But I don't think anyone expected it to be 50%. And I think people thought it could be implemented later this year, probably closer to November than the timing that has just been guided to the market.
All right, so a lot of countries are moving copper into America right now, but which countries around the world are most at risk here from these big tariffs?
Yeah, so look, I think the first thing everyone's worried about is who exactly does US get their copper from? And Chile is the one that everyone is watching to see what do they do. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, copper from Chile can be redirected elsewhere. But is it going to be game-changing for the market? And I think this is going to be the big question to answer, because at the end of the day, US only accounts for about 6% of global demand for copper. And it produces about 55 to 65% of what they need. So their ability to dictate price is actually quite limited. And so, the trade flows, yes, it might be disrupted. We might see different copper make it into the US to meet their demand needs. But overall, I would still say that LME and the real market in terms of the international market is still going to be dictated by what happens with particularly China and how I would say global trade tensions really unfold in the next few months.
All right, what about Australia? Do we export that much copper to America, or is it more big listed companies like BHP and Rio, which do have mines in places like South America, are the ones that are more likely to be affected here?
So in terms of Australia's exposure, look, it's very much going to be the producers in the US that will benefit from this tariff. And in that, the companies that I would say benefit from Australia would certainly be Rio Tinto, right? They are a sizable share of US copper mine production and even refined production. So from that perspective, I'd say Rio is where that exposure is from Australia's side. But there's other major US copper producers that benefit too. Freeport, McMoran, and Grupo Mexico, those would be the other two I'd be watching as well. But the benefit is clearly to domestic US copper producers. The one caveat I'll put around all this, though, is that, yes, it may benefit upstream in terms of the copper producers. But if you go further downstreams to those that consume copper, the higher price paid is something that can really hurt that industry. And this is something that we have precedents of. If we go back to 2018 to 2021, this is exactly what happened with steel and aluminium. And yes, we saw an increase in steel and aluminium production capacity in the US, but downstream, we saw more negatives and reduced output. And overall, it was a net negative impact. So I think the US here is really playing with fire. And if it doesn't go to plan, it could actually be worse for the US economy, just given how the downstream sector responds.
Vivek Dhar from Commonwealth Bank, great to have you on the show.
No worries, thank you.